Dober večer vsem skupaj. Lep pozdrav tudi vsem tistim, ki spremljate inavguracijsko predavanje izrednega profesorja Vase Perovića tudi preko video povezav. V veliko čast, predvsem pa veliko veselje mi je, da lahko kot dekan fakultete za arhitekturo danes tu napovem tudi po en velik dogodek posvetitve izrednega profesorja v rednega profesorja naše fakultete. Vasa Perović, rojen leta 65 v Srbiji, je diplomiral najprej na univerzi v Beogradu, kasneje opravil magisterij v Amsterdamu na Predlage institut pod mentorstvom Elija Zengelis in Kennetha Framptona. In po zaključku magisterija, mislim, da hitro najdel pot zaradi neljubih dogajanj v rodni Srbiji v Slovenijo. Tekom študija v Amsterdamu je stkal nekaj prijateljstev z slovenskimi arhitekti in v sodelovanju z kolegom Matijo Bevkom v Ljubljani našel primeren prostor za nadaljevanje svoje bleščeče profesionalne kariere. Presoja, ali Vasa ustreza pogojem za rednega profesorja, je pravzaprav nekaj, kar je zgolj hipotetično vprašanje. Njegovi dosežki, njegova pomembna, 28 pomembnih del, pravzaprav so tako velikega in tako pomembnega značaja, da bi jih bilo potrebno graditi ali objaviti kvečemu 5-6. Med njimi seveda lahko izpostavim Islamski verski center, srednjo šolo oziroma fakulteto v Bruslju, prenovo kazemat v Wiener Neustadt, obenem pa v svoji vlogi za rednega profesorja napoveduje še 4 ali 3 večstanovanjske gradnje v Pragi in eno na Dunaju. Skratka, ne gre zgolj za odličnega arhitekta v področju Slovenije, ampak gre pravzaprav res za svetovno zvezdo arhitekture, kar dokazuje tudi z svojimi mednarodnimi objavami, med katerimi vsekakor vesti monografska publikacija. Lahko bi še dolgo in dolgo našteval, kaj sta z Matijo Bevkom skupaj uspela v 20 letih, odkar imata skupaj biro doseči. Vendar bom skušal to priliko, ko imam možnost, da vas tudi na nek način osebno dogovorim, se spomnim trenutkov, ko je pravzaprav prvič vstopil v prostore te fakultete, ko je že sodeloval z Matijo in iskal recimo pomoč, študentsko pomoč pri mladih, debutnih študentih, med katerimi je bil tudi danes docent na fakulteti Mitja Zorc. No in takratni mentor, profesor Miloš Bonča, je imel do prišletov, kot je bil Vasa, nekoliko konzervativen odnos in je Vasa pravzaprav pazil, da se z Bončo ne bi srečal in je večkrat potrkal v predavalnico, v risalnico predor na drugom nadstropju in vprašal, je Bozo tu? In če Bozo ta, se pravi, Bonče ni bilo, je Vasa vstopil in se pogovarjal z nami v resnici zelo prijetno in zelo odprto. Drug dogodek, ki si ga upam razkriti, je, ko je pravzaprav še ni imel stanovanja v Ljubljani, je živel pri pokojnemu Milošu Florjančiču in vsako jutro zavzel kopalnico za, tako pravi Miloš, mu da celo uro in je, ko je stopil ven, je pač Vasa rekel, Miloš vpraša, kaj si počel, ja, tuširal sem figurini. Skratka, Vasa ni imel, bom rekel, ni imel predsotkov, ampak mislim, da je to tudi značilnost njegove arhitekture. Skratka je odprta, neposredna, hkrati tudi izjemno iskrena. Poleg tega ga odlikuje tudi izjemno pedagoško delo, uspešen seminar, 16 delavnic, med katerimi so številne dosegle pravzaprav nivo kakovostnih umetniških del, razstavljenih v številnih priložnostih, večkrat v Muzeju za arhitekturo in oblikovanje, kakor tudi so njegovi diplomanti in diplomantke dosegali seveda maksimalne univerzitetne uspehe v obliki Prešernovih nagrad in priznanj. Poleg vsega tega, skratka izjemnega strokovnega dela in odličnega pedagoškega dela, je Vasa aktivan seveda tudi v vodstvu fakultete in se mu na tem mestu seveda zahvaljujem za izjemno konstruktivno 4-letno delovanje kot prodekan za umetniško dejavnost, hkrati pa seveda tudi član kolegija dekana, kjer vsakih 14 dni se srečujemo in se razpravljamo in odločamo o ključnih usodah in premikih, ki se dogajajo v zadnjih 4 letih na tej fakulteti. Skratka, gre za skupen uspeh, katerega del si tudi ti, Vasa, in hvala lepa. Tako da od tega trenutka ti predajam govorniški pult in vsem vam želim čim več užitkov po tvojem predavanju.
Hvala lepa, hvala Matej. Pardon, moje današnje predavanje v angleščini. So, good evening everybody, thanks for this very generous introduction. I hope I'm going to be speaking in English because there are some people on YouTube also watching this small, well, not small, in fact, presentation. And that I kind of titled, without really too much consideration for what I was going to talk about, 6 or more memos. So basically, thank you for this opportunity to present today, even though I have a continuous struggle with words. I mean, I talk a lot, but I kind of tend to have very, very short focuses with my talk. So it would have been probably more advisable to organize an exhibition out there on this empty white wall instead of doing this talk, which is kind of inaugural, but at the same time needs to be topical. To start with, some thanks are in order to all the people who have in their own way contributed to my being here today. First of all, to the previous dean, not the current dean, but the previous dean, who has been instrumental in bringing me, Gabi, who is maybe here, who has been instrumental in bringing me along with some other professors to this place, not so long ago, maybe 10 or 12 years ago, I think. So, and kind of transform this into kind of my own place. Then I couldn't find the photograph, I never take pictures, so I found it on the website to Jure and Anja, who has been my assistant in name, and Jure has been a technical collaborator, and however we call it in this school, in name, but much more partners in this process. Jure doesn't work with us in the studio anymore, but their insights and ideas, in fact, inevitably determined much of the work that we did in this place with students over the years. And this is why I also, because we never get to talk, we always talk about our own work, because somehow we show our own projects, and part of my inaugural lecture also has to be something about our own projects, and it's going to happen a little bit in the end. But I decided we never talk about the student work, and we never talk about the fact why we do the student work and how we do the student work and why we do what we do, in fact. So I think that the work that Jure, Anja, and myself have done deserves some sort of a presentation. So, as I said, I have titled this talk 6 or more memos, without much really construction, advanced construction of what I was going to talk about. But I actually felt a need to acknowledge a kind of debt of my generation and also my own, as a person and also as an architect, to a famous Calvino book of Lezioni Americane, American Lectures, which was a set of lectures never finished, prepared in 1985 for Harvard University and posthumously published in 1988, which in a way kind of marked my own development, as I said, both as a person, as an architect, and basically presented something that for me was a tool, and probably also for other people of my generation was a tool to kind of live with, but that I feel today that is a tool that needs to be continuously looked at and continuously upgraded and continuously reappropriated for the changing environment we inhabit. And those 6 memos, and I wanted to use the first memo, the Memo of Lightness, which does not really refer to weight, but to this kind of this kind of a way of thinking, or as Calvino put it, the way of rising above the noise of the world. This is why this and more came in, because I somehow feel the need to kind of see architecture not as a deterministic position-making or position-taking profession, but as a kind of an open process in which all sources are open and all sources are valid. So I will not therefore talk about topics raised by Calvino in relation to literature, of course, in his case, but very relatable to architecture as well. I will only say that conditions in which we work and the conditions that of the society that we currently inhabit, even though Calvino's work is very old, Calvino was in very many ways very visionary about actually what is happening to us even today. But still, it kind of requires a continuous, let's say, looking back and a continuous upgrade. As I said, I was going to talk a lot about the works without further ado. I'm just going to jump into the work of the students. I will start by showing what we have been doing in my studio in the school in the past decade or more, a little bit over a decade. In this period, Anya, Jure, and myself have spoken to probably thousands of people, probably well over 1,000 at least. Have actually worked with a few hundred people, and have unfortunately in the process produced enormous amounts of trash. All of this ends up in garbage at the end of every exhibition that we produce. We have filled our studio space with projects many times over. I think, well, obviously 12 times over for the yearly exhibitions. We could have insulated probably a few buildings with the material that we have thrown, with more or less success, and these are some of the early years. We have also conquered spaces around the school to produce models. You can see that one year we had the very, well, I would say not very intelligent idea to produce models in 1:50. So we worked with students in a diversity of scales, sometimes beyond reasonable. And probably in this year, we used more styrofoam than an average construction company in Slovenia. In order to present the work of these aspiring young architects or students of architecture that we have been tasked with somehow teaching. And maybe to what end? I'm actually showing a few works, some of them, or all of them in fact, I live with, but maybe as a kind of a question, a sort of a illustration, I would say, and something that poses questions and illustrates particular points that I want to make. What exactly constitutes a work of architecture? What is the character, and how do we actually teach architecture? And this is something that I thought was maybe, this was the occasion to talk about. So I'll start with this work, which is a typewritten page of Robert Barry, an American artist from 1970s, active in 1970s, from 1971, which is one of the 20 A4 formats that were exhibited in a show in 1971 or 1972, where he obviously talks about something. I have to put my glasses because there's no way I can read this. Well, even with this. Where he talks about something and it that has a beginning and order, limits, possibilities, structure, continuity, influence, etc., etc. In fact, he talks this it, and it was all these 20 pieces of A4 paper were filled in with different definitions of what constitutes a work of art, not a work of architecture. But if you look through this, you will see that practically all of these issues also relate to a work of architecture. And in most of the issues. So we could apply paradoxically, most of these things to architecture, but architecture actually has more challenges posed in front of it. And this is where the key difference, I think, in between the work of art and the work of architecture happens. It has a pronounced public aspect, which art does not really have to have. Or it can sometimes evade, should it wish to do so. It pollutes our universe. In the worst case scenario, architecture is much bigger pollutant because it basically stays for at least 20, 50, 100 years. Whatever reaches the age of 50 today seems to be protected as a monument. So in a sense, a pollutant stays potentially forever. So in at least those two senses. And secondly, the architecture in fact has to be in use or be used or have a kind of a physical ability to be physically used by users, which art also has the kind of the exclusivity of not adhering to. So how did we indeed decide to put forward our school curriculum, and how do we, Anya, Jure, and myself, try to teach this, or tried to teach, now it's only Anya and me, our future colleagues the basics of our profession. We have been teaching at this school for this decade or more. And how does one really teach architecture today? How do we construct the process in which a future former student will emerge with enough tools and knowledge to be able to possibly perform and construct something that might be called a work of architecture at some point? What does it take to know how to build? Is it an amount of technical skills, like this one, my favorite book, Kniefer? An amount of knowledge about space, about buildings, or about knowledge about history? Or is it an amount of visual talent or inspiration that will somehow construct this persona of a future architect? The school offers or attempts to offer most of the things I mentioned, or all of the things I mentioned before in the school curriculum. But none of them in themselves are a guarantee that what emerges as a product is going to be what is promised, an architect. Because I think architect is, in my opinion, something that we ourselves personally construct on our own. We develop into that individually, and the school is a constructed 5-year environment which kind of gives us tools, offers courses, but also gives us tools to maybe take on this individual journey. We as teachers offer this set of prescribed knowledge points, teach or attempt to teach necessary skills, theoretical, technical, or artistic, or whatever. But the important part of the teaching process is, in a way, the unteachable one, or the one that basically everybody has to face individually. And what we try to do by challenging students to think beyond the knowledge that we are offering, beyond the bits and pieces of information that is served as knowledge to students. We, in a way, push them, or this is what we try in our studio, push them outside of the boundaries. And again, I abuse the work of an artist. We give them this knowledge to kind of pull apart and use in order to construct their own possible reality or their own imaginary project of architecture. Like this work of this artist, this is Nicolas Lamas, which is called Unarchaeology, in which a brick is broken, meticulously archived piece by piece, and then reassembled in a possible new reality. So in more or less this way, we kind of break the brick of knowledge and basically allow for this possible new reality to be constructed. If that happens with some of our students at least, and I think it did happen, it does happen with some of the young people that we work with, we could say that we have succeeded as teachers, that we have indeed given them tools to become possibly participants in the construction of the future habitat. In order to do so, I'm going to show just a few workshops that we did with the students, and then maybe 1 or 2 studio projects. With Anya and Jure, who, as I said, were actually partners in everything, not in everything, well, and they were assistants, but they were actually partners in everything but the name. We have attempted in the past years to, in a way, force students outside of their comfort zones. And this is maybe the first time that we actually explain why we do what we do. Workshops, as you know, or at least most of you know, are these 1 or 2 a week quick projects that we do with students in the beginning of the year in order for the students to get acquainted, in order to the students get to know each other and kind of form sort of a bond. And the idea the idea of this particular workshop we named Life After IKEA. Of course, this was actually before IKEA came to Slovenia, before it was open. We gave it this name because we wanted to give a task of, and of course it was based on the famous novel of Douglas Copeland, Life After God, from the 1990s, because we wanted to basically challenge the notion of constructing domesticity with the students. And this kind of primal relation with the objects that surround us, with the world that we inhabit. In a kind of post-industrial society, which is overwhelmingly covered with produce and products, we use this as a reference image. This is not, of course, part of that workshop. This is a project of Andrea Branzi from early 90s or late 80s, Animali Domestici, in which basically Branzi uses this machine-tooled anonymous base covered in sheepskin with backside and handles in beech branches, constructed in beech branches. It's a kind of a powerful picture of a necessity to kind of reclaim the primitive and the animistic, and to reclaim this domesticity which has been taken away from us in this kind of post-consumer or consumer society. We have shown the results of this workshop in Museum of Architecture, and Maya, who is sitting here, was very kind to write a short text for this catalog. This exhibition was the exhibition about the process. It was a series of very quick projects done in a week or two, and then prepared for an exhibition, of course, for a much longer period of time, done by a few student groups. So researching the theme of objects that surrounds us, performing their designated task. In this case, this is a kind of exploding table where all of the surfaces somehow force one, when using the table, to behave in a different way when using it. Constructed out of appropriated copper piping, or this kind of constructed memory holder, I would call it. I don't know what was the name of the project. A layered piece of evidently useless piece of furniture, but useful piece of some sort of a construction of one's identity, useful in conveying this intimate history of its owner. Or students who were dealing with the storage systems. So actually this middle one looks probably like most of your student rooms. Some of them doing this kind of weaving, parasitical storage space for our homes, where our homes would all of a sudden be transformed from this bland plasterboard boxes into some sort of a imaginary landscape, hand-woven to be filled with an array of personal possessions. So kind of transforming the chaos of our lives into a kind of an expressive form. Or a table or a chair or whatever this was, a horizontal surface piece with two horizontal pieces, and then a kind of a bubblegum or Nutella-like leg in the middle, in between, which also required some, of course, research and to be produced, and then produced as some sort of a jellyfish slash whatever, I don't know. It's kind of always unique, but always remaining the same, but unique every time it gets produced. So an exhibition was definitely not about the works themselves. It was more about the generative process of the works. And this is how it was also shown, with all the kind of research that went into these products, without claiming that the products, in fact, have incredible value, except for the message that they were actually carrying, and kind of moving away from the expected perfection of design exhibitions. Other workshops were workshops where we very often focused on a particular material and researched that particular material. Like this workshop with Steklarna Hrastnik 3 years ago, called Breathe Blow, where students faced the challenge of this kind of real material, of real process of making, of real industrial workshop, or something that basically in this kind of elevated position of an educational institution you don't see so often. This is students on the factory floor, and very in a way, kind of naivety or open-mindedness of the students we thought could bring interesting results. This is in the middle picture. In the middle is Maria, who recently graduated, blowing her first piece of glass. Well, very often these things were executed to the big dismay of the staff who has been used to, of the factory staff who has been used to working in the same way for very many years. So with some surprising effects, research into retaining the liquid properties of glass in hard form, where somehow this molten hot liquid origin of material would be kept through in the finished product. Some series of vessels. The sketches of students, one in the left-hand corner down, showing this idea of collective glass blowing exercise, a simultaneous twin making of vessels. So something that basically takes the processes and looks at the processes in a different way. The one on the upper right-hand corner, kind of a prosthetic device, without which is used to produce an object, but also object can only exist when standing on top of this piece of its own origin. Or a vessel that is appropriated to a human body, the vase, which can be a vase only if we hold it in our hands, otherwise basically it doesn't work. Again, shown in the exhibition setting, and in this kind of constructed object, a totem, a tower of products, which combines the industrial production of glass, of float glass, and of industrially produced bottles by the same producer, and basically fills the space of this shelf/tower with the products of the students. You can see that it was actually designed as a piece of architecture, as a building with its own structure and floors, and with its own floor plans. So in a sense, kind of a return trip to the origins of our profession. Or what was recently shown by Lovre, who is here, I know, and Alexander and Andraž in Piran. So I'm not going to show it for very long because some of you have been to Piran. A workshop where the idea was to work with concrete, but we named it at home with concrete because we wanted to remove the material from its usual setting. Basically, it's a material that we use in our daily constructive practice, but in this case, it was kind of pushed into home environment, in this case, into another format. We thought that this could also bring some interesting results. We also always publish some sort of books which have the text, this one written by Jure, about the alchemy of concrete, about this kind of alchemical process of producing something that is going to turn from liquid form into a stone, with these pictures of Luigi Nervi, famous Italian engineer, sitting in a boat of his own making at the time when he was making all these incredible structures, floating in concrete. To the kind of incredible history of concrete, Mexico and Rome on the same page, and then with 20 centuries apart, and with only a few years apart, Rome and Marseille. So the kind of plastic possibilities of material, which actually now become plastic possibilities of some sort of small-scale production. So from mountain to cement, a video essay which was shown also in Piran, the kind of transformation of material from cement to an object that happens in a kind of a workshop, and all the processes in between, the molds and the processes, which basically are kind of, for most of the students, in fact, first experiences of some sort of actual execution. We think that and some products, of course, again shown recently in the Museum of Architecture and also shown here in the corridor up until, I think, 2 weeks ago. These workshops, they are short. Well, this one was very long because it was also Corona, let's say, colored with Corona. But these workshops are very quick and very short projects, and in a sense are sometimes overtly naive, but in a way, I think, very good, some sort of way of working with different tools and different skills and different, in this case, industries. Sometimes we do these projects which are also workshops, also very short, with some sort of other participants. This one was called From Virtuous Situation Towards Narrative Assemblages. I don't know if you understand what it means, but it will explain itself on the next image. It was done by Central office, young office from Brussels, and Maxime Delvaux, a very good photographer that works with a lot of architects, also takes pictures for our office. Radim Lauda from Central was also working for a few years for our office, but it's a partnership of 3 people that were doing the workshop. First, they explained the virtuous situations basically the idea of a situation and the idea of a virtuous situation is some sort of a generous, humanistic situation in space. This is architecture of Aldo van Eyck. This is a school where I studied, and then this is a domestic situation. This is actually the apartment of Aldo van Eyck. Then they explain the idea of narrative assemblage, of something that takes from this kind of reality and constructs another reality, abstracts it and constructs another reality. On the left-hand side is a vase that is actually from my apartment. On the right-hand side is the work of Richard Vanlet, a Belgian artist, a vase done by some sort of little piece of architecture by Andrea Branzi. Then they put forward this text of Klaas Kehevik from TU Delft about learning from Plečnik, because Plečnik was actually the subject. And we thought this was a good idea because it also removed a little bit of this aura of untouchableness that we have constructed around Plečnik, I think especially in the recent years. And from this, and that this was a process, and this was basically the entry image into the process, where you see three similar situations: an intervention of Plečnik in Prague, an intervention of Aldo van Eyck in his own apartment, in practically exactly the same, and the narrative assemblage of Konrad Dular, a Belgian sculptor, who kind of reconstruct. He is the only one who is aware of the previous two situations. Then the organizers propose a process. Step one, site visit, seeing works of Plečnik and taking a huge amount of pictures of these small situations around Plečnik with Maxime Delvaux. Deconstructing this breaking apart the pieces of these little compositions, where you simultaneously look at the photograph as a composition and also at the contents of the photograph, which is the work of Plečnik. Translation, abstraction, and scale change were explained in text how it happens. And then production and assemblage, a single material, a sheet of steel, 3mm steel, and all the projects were done in this 3mm steel, and photography. This is something that we think is very important. We always force students into learning how to communicate work of architecture. It's not, we of course do them for ourselves, but basically inability to communicate, especially a project, is something that is going to be a huge hindrance in your future lives, in their future lives. And then this is finally an exhibition of this kind of little narrative assemblages created out of Plečnik. The front piece, obviously coming from Križanke. They always retain this kind of original link, I think. The piece in the back, or this one in fact, obviously relating to the market. You see the flowers standing in the front. This piece obviously related to all the staircases and relation of the staircases and the riverbank or the river itself in this kind of liquid form appearing in this piece. The aim of all these workshops, as well as the projects we do, and what is basically to stimulate students for a possibility to think critically very quickly, to try to assemble an idea out of the amount of knowledge that they have, and to kind of stimulate the imagination for a very short period of time. And then we have the work of studio, which is the studio work is what we do for 2 semesters in this school for people that are outside. It is a 2-semester project which we pursue with students. We encounter different pace of work and different, let's say, possibility to think and do things. It is a kind of a durational exercise that is probably more challenging, but also more relevant to student development. Let's say more knowledge gets acquired in this process. It does also, at the same time, does not mean that it cannot be light and humorous, which brings me back to the lightness of Calvino. Which is the lightness where he says of rising above the noise of the world. And this is the work of a British artist, Syl Floyer, who basically opens a box of markers, takes a piece of paper, puts the marker on so that it touches a piece of paper, so that the entire color from the marker gets soaked by the paper. And this package of markers is basically what you see here as a work. This package was 40 pieces in a perfect order. Each of those looks like this. I show it as some sort of a durational exercise, which in this case performed by the artist. But at the same time, of course it's called ink on paper. I don't have to tell you the work. But it retains the lightness and the humor and the easy approach despite this kind of long process. And this is something that we think is very important with the projects. So I'm going to show this project, Ljubljana Unlimited, which is a project where we put students in a situation where I don't know if this is a post-text or a pre-text, you can tell us, but which puts people into, which puts students in a situation, basically we try to imagine, kind of pose an imaginary situation in which Ljubljana, in which we would work in which we would imagine a different kind of society to work in. Taking into account Slovene mentality, well, at least my foreign vision of a Slovene mentality maybe a bit, taking problems that we see in a society and the problems that we see in a city. Ljubljana is absolutely perfect in the center of the city. All of the character of the city is in the center. The periphery of the city, even the immediate periphery of the city, basically has no character. And we thought, and then Slovenia as an economy doesn't have a big future. We have to understand that we are small and that we are never going to become big, that we are essentially never going to be a successful large-scale economy. So basically it has to choose its partners for the potential future. And if it focuses on education, which is what we do here, and if it focuses, which is the cheapest actually part of the economy, if you look at the percentages, and if it focuses on stimulating creativity, and if it provides some sort of spaces that could, if it recognizes the amount of old people, and if it tries to kind of turn it into an operational tool as well, and if it tries to develop those new typologies and new pieces of architecture in suburban situations that lack character, we could imagine that in the far future, Ljubljana would have the same specific character that we now pride on in the center of the city, all over the territory of the city. So there is this model of some sort of put together, pieces of Ljubljana put together with the white buildings in between, where each project is also presented on a wall with this kind of single unified image. This was the year where we started prescribing our students a singular presentation of their projects. Not so much, they were complaining a lot because they thought it reduces the individual input that they have in the projects, but we thought that, now they can find out why we did it, that basically this collective exercise and the collective appearance of the entire project is much more important. And also for somebody young to learn that basically we have to sometimes subject our own individual ambitions to a collective goal. And so we set up a series of projects. For example, in Šiška, I think this was Lenart, it kind of gets animated in the area on the corner of Drenikova with this kind of strange insertion of a combination of a covered market, workspaces, apartments for active seniors. I'm not going to show you or tell you a lot about the projects, but proposes a kind of a dense, very dense city situation. Density, of course, is something that we fight very much against when it goes hand in hand with the commercial interests. But the kind of a positive density, a programmatic density in parts of the city can be very constructive. So a kind of a market on the ground floor, a market on the first floor, a kind of a workshops on the ground floor, and senior houses on top. All in some sort of a combination of a productive glasshouse environment. Again, these kind of perfect renders, which were done by a single person in our studio and shipped over to a server in China, so produced all at the same time. Another project from the same series of projects is a kind of a combination of, in another suburban situation, this is Tržaška ulica. So basically you see the contents of the street, I think, portrayed very well, seemingly without origin and without any sort of future, in a way, to propose this kind of combination of a production facility, a tower, which is a factory, and a showroom in the base, and then which is completely accessible, and then on this upper part of the pyramid, of the inverted pyramid, is a kind of workspaces and workshops. So you could climb, you could extend the street up to the 5th or 6th floor, so the Tržaška would get a kind of another 5 layers that relate somehow to the street, and then from the 6th floor onwards to the 11th floor, it would basically start expanding again into a kind of a weird tower. in a way, we tried with this project to imagine a different city with students. We let them, let's say, operate, of course, within their own abilities and talent, but we basically push them to create this field of active, programmatically diverse attractors that could become some sort of beacons for the new city. And finally, we and whether the city in totality could become as precious as the city center on one day. For example, this piece that you see, this kind of stadium-like piece, is actually BTC, which is proposed as some sort of a student destination and culinary destination for the city, where 3 students works on this renovation of this silo, so Žito, into a student residence. Then there is this kind of inverted tower of a culinary school and a big culinary center. So in a sense, it could almost become a food destination for the people of the city. Then the students of the second year, who basically deal with housing in our studio, construct this island along the river where they transform the area of the old factory and workshop complex into this kind of diverse island of housing. And a kind of a strange kind of urbanity which arises not out of planning, but out of proximity of different things together. So in a sense, by putting different things together, you create this kind of specific spatial situation which almost seems as if it doesn't require plan, where you can have weird little towers with single units, a kind of a little flowers, that grow and kind of recede back. That kind of brings specificity to this idea of suburban sprawl. Or Andraži's project as the last, which is this tower on a corner of Zaloška and Kajuhova, I think. A kind of a weird tower consisting out of 3 legs that have circulation, and then a kind of a patio housing for the elderly on top, with all the other programs like a camping and workshops and everything suspended on steel cables from the top. So different floor plans. This is probably a workshop, I suppose, area. This is a polygon, this creative space that was formerly in Tabačina. These are these are the workshops, and then the camping site. And then on top, this a kind of a closed-off, almost a monastery-like space for the elderly, where they all kind of live in a kind of a green Arcadia sitting on top of the building, while at the same time supporting the structure of the entire tower, a series of double-height spaces. So finally, in this way, we try to propose a city with this other layer over it, but we also try to somehow basically push students towards this point where the acquired knowledge has to be transformed into some sort of critical thinking. We talked about the idea of architect as politician or architecture and politics, architect as politician and politician as architect, which is a more successful profession, I think. So basically raised all different issues that I think work with the students. Let's say something that students will carry onwards. On top you see, I can't see it of course, but you can see a quote, when we moved a year later into the countryside. We came to the countryside from this Ljubljana Unlimited project, so from an extreme urbanity and with this extreme urbane methodology, let's say, we moved to the countryside. But countryside today is no longer, not necessarily this kind of romantic idea of some sort of re-immersion of ourselves into nature. First of all, because we have recultivated all of the nature anyway. But we come to this nature from the perspective of the city, which you see on top in this Branci quote. And where Lovre and Iza, Lovre is here, propose this kind of a combined SPA, a famous Slovenian program that seems to be loved for the last 20 years or 25 years, as seen as some sort of symbol of progress in villages around Slovenia, but then this one sitting and on the heat produced by server farms. So in a sense, a kind of a production, a Bitcoin exercise that can be transformed into this kind of constructive landscape. And the landscape of Lovre in Iza a series of server facilities topped with a kind of Arcadian constructions that propose this kind of pleasure in nature, fed by the the energy produced by other means than Earth. A server farm in this longitudinal piece which heats this kind of huge swimming pool / lake, a huge beach constructed in this in the landscape, surrounded by this hilly landscape of surrounding the area, or a hotel with a kind of an Indian settlement tent hotel turned towards inwards, and another one, a kind of a family retreat, a kind of a line cutting into the landscape. In a sense, I think this is a project, Lovre is here, so this is a project that talks about this, in a way, our need to somehow reconfirm rethink in a very light way our relation to natural universe, which we have basically transformed beyond recognition, and to try to reconstruct it in some sort of a different model. This is a project of Vanessa and Hannah, I think. And we allow for the romantic visions as well in our studio, so it's not all about this kind of terrorism of this kind of new typologies. So this is a romantic vision of a herb farm, constructed on these beautiful images of plants that they produced, where the earthwork at the bottom is some sort of a drying facility for the herbs, and then a light construction on top is a house. So this is again a spa, and then this is a drying facility for herbs, and then a light hotel and a light house for the family on top. In a sense, a kind of a reconstructed Arcadia, but then with exactly the same premise, like the previous, in my opinion, like the previous image. We have conquered the world, and we have to find a way in which we are going to reaffirm it again. The exhibition. We also teach AO4 with Anya, as some of you have had to listen to our endless lectures. AO4, as you know, is this kind of a theoretical subject which is taught from the first year onwards. Tadej and Marusha teach students about light, shadow, volume, the basics. Second year is Mitya, who introduces materiality. Third year is Matej and Tomasz, who introduce the idea of structure. And in the fourth year, it's me, and held by Jure and Anya, introducing the knowledge of typologies. We talk about typologies because by submerging students into this array of typological examples, this is a talk about the house. This is actually what we have. This is taken from the school server, the kind of synopsis of lectures for the students, where we start somewhere in Lascaux, and then somewhere with Ishigami, a kind of a start from nature and return to nature with everything that's spreading in between. We talk about office buildings, where I don't know why on these images, but generally we have everything from Hammurabi on top to the movie, what was the name of the movie? Office Space, where these guys are destroying, with all the typological diversity of office buildings that you see in between. By putting forward this amount, we don't request knowledge from students. We request understanding. We request some sort of understanding of the kind of all the possibilities of our profession that have happened throughout the centuries, either in terms of typologies or in terms of understanding of the world in which we live in. Because only by doing that you can actually find analogies throughout history in between Herzog de Meuron and OMA and the Scottish castles, which were actually used by in all the projects of, for example, Louis Kahn or Sumtor, or you can actually understand how the revolutionary projects of Archizum, for example, found in a space of only a few years from their way from kind of complete utopia to complete reality. So how they got built as a kind of a museum and cultural center that we all appreciate today, and how somewhere in between there was this little factory in Italy, designed also by Renzo Piano, which kind of turned all the interior of the technicalities of the factory inside out, which also was a part of the concept of the Pompidou Center. So in a sense, Or, for example, the office building as a kind of a total environment, first time proposed, in fact, in the project of Willis Faber Dumas in Ipswich by Norman Foster, which, of course, draws some sort of direct references to this kind of utopian possibilities of covering pieces of city by Buckminster Fuller. Finally, ending up with the actual construction of this Fuller's project in the Google headquarters in San Francisco. By Big, which is actually now being constructed, and which is a kind of a mix in between, I would say, Roman city and Buckminster Fuller, because organizationally it's a Roman city. In all of this, students are not really our collaborators. We don't, now I'm putting forward everything that goes behind our thinking when we think of the tasks for the students. But they are basically our partners, and we also did quite a bit of diplomas, and some of these diplomas were actually very successful. This was awarded Plečnik Prize, but I thought that this is interesting because it kind of returns back or has the same kind of lightness, also physical lightness in this case, that I think is owed, but also the intelligent lightness that is owed to Calvino from the beginning. So kind of a construction of a temporary building for Nook, on the site of Nook, temporary building for SNG Drama, another project that we somehow are working on for a long time. But also proposing this kind of transformation of an institution itself. So in a sense, this is not only about having something temporary, but also about kind of changing the city through a temporary object, changing the understanding of the institution that it represents. This a very short, well, very short, very long in fact, but inevitably, let's say, superficial picture of what we do as a studio, I think, gives you a little bit of an idea that the construction of education of an architect or an architectural student is actually difficult and quite an important part of the process. Because if we start seeing the school environment as some sort of a I give, you take environment, then we're going to be unhappy because what is taken is not enough. But if we start seeing it as some sort of a platform where we propose and push and the others participate, I think it could be a somewhat better institution for the future. I also have to show probably some of the works that we did, because it's part of this inauguration, is also part of my promotion today, is also the work that we have been, that Mateo so generously presented. He obviously looked at my application just before coming here, but is the work that we carry out as an office. As you know, or as Mateo also said, for more than 20 years, Mateo and I worked together. And it is also a kind of a process, no? But also the work of the office is a kind of a process. And this is an illustration of this idea of process. This is a work of, it's called mailed painting. And it's a work of Karin Sander, a German artist, who, by the way, teaches art in ETH Zurich to young architects. When she's invited for an exhibition, she sends a blank canvas into the post by stamping the address on the back of the canvas and sending it over in the normal post or DHL. Everything that happens in the process of the travel in between the two cities, in between, for example, Berlin and Caracas, becomes the work of art. So everything that accidentally touches upon the surface of the painting is part of that painting. And also this Mondrian effect is in fact not part of the drawing, but it's part of the packaging which was added by DHL somewhere along this route. And when you, and the name of the painting is the name of the cities it has traveled to in order for the work to be produced. It testifies to this idea of process, which is in fact much more included in our work as architects. The processes in architecture take much longer, and well, this is the exhibition of these mailed paintings. And we have, with Mattia, tried to create for ourselves this environment in which these processes that sometimes takes years and years and decades in some way can happen. And this is what we call an office. In fact, it's a crammed space where we work with 10 or 12 or 13 people, and in which we, over, again, a process, over a long period of years, try to construct a few buildings. Some of those buildings will be about typologies, or a kind of hybridization of typologies, a combination for this house in between a villa with no fence towards the city, and the kind of a patio house. Or, so this is, the origin is purely typological. The origin of this building is basically Tomžale, is not typologically derived. It is built out of program. So a kind of a bland and uninteresting site where the only program is a family with 4 people. These are all very old projects, 4 children. So these 4 children and the ability to live in the kind of a singular environment with your 4 small kids is something that kind of constructs the typology for the house. Sometimes you have to work with the urban planning rules, which we all hate as architects and which we all find limiting in so very many ways. But if we wouldn't have them, we would have probably even worse chaos. So often they're considered as limitations, but let's say we try to remain formally, let's say, traditional in a rural environment, while in a way at the same time readdressing the relation between the house and the landscape, long lost with this advance of the urban sprawl around our cities. And then these were the really old projects, and I will only show a fresh one. Alyosha and Dina were in Piran, so they've seen it. Lovre was in Piran, so he has seen it, but it's going to be much shorter. Recent example, one of kind of renovation in summer in Kodeljevo, which I showed last week, where in fact the project is really not about the renovation. There is nothing to renovate when we see this house, but it's a kind of construction. We try to kind of construct a different reality out of what is there. So in a way, we call it our sustainable project, because we are true believers that thermal insulation is not really the way for us as architects to teach sustainability. So basically out of 3 apartments, 3 very small apartments, we get a kind of one single house for the family. It is a statement of this kind of possibility. In a way, the whole thing is a statement of a possibility to derive a project out of the process. The shadow of the old house, to which we had to add more bedrooms, remains hidden somewhere within the structure of the cladding. The blue things are the pieces of rooms and the pieces of walls that we extract and throw away. The roof that we dismantle, the floors that we demolish in blue. And in this process, we see demolition as some sort of a constructive and generative process for the entire work. So in this kind of ugly pictures of this is actually the dining room. So the dining room, if you look at it from the living room, becomes, this process becomes somehow frozen and integrated into this construction of this new piece. So it's a building that doesn't have rooms because everything is connected. It's a building that has spaces that somehow perform programs. So this ground floor is the floor of the living room. There is a library there. There's 2 living room spaces on the right-hand side, where all the pieces of old paint that we found from the 20s and 30s, from where the house was constructed, probably sometime in the 20s, are perfectly preserved and frozen, while all our interventions remained in the material in which we executed them. In this case, a concrete beam, which basically had to be put into this kind of demolished wall. Even the floor is old, it's just painted. And so somehow this almost Pompeian or kind of Roman color that kind of emerges and gives a totally different layer of quality to the entire space. Looking from the living room into the dining room, which in fact was an underground apartment before, and going down to the basement, or to former basement, which now is a kitchen space, which is in fact a series of, again, spaces that are completely connected with a stove for the bread stove somewhere in the middle, and the kitchen which allows one to actually exit into the garden. Again, going up, and on the first floor we had to add 2 bedrooms, because what is with the wooden floor is actually what the house had before we started doing it. So there are 2 children's bedrooms which are added, which are relatively small, so that and they are done in linoleum, and this white paint, where the material in which we constructed with recycled bricks is actually visible. Pieces of furniture that help us move through the house, just added into the old pieces of the house. And going back down into this central space, into this area which one might call a living room, which is a set of rooms that comes together to perform as a living room for the family. So in a sense, this is why I call it a project, or Mattia and I call it a project of reconstruction, where basically a totally different reality is constructed through a process of preservation of the existing. This was a very long process. We actually had workers hired on an hourly basis rather than on a work basis, so that we could change our minds and work continuously with the clients on decision-making processes to make the building. So in a sense, the building doesn't look like much, but in a sense, I think it has the kind of richness that very few houses that you construct out of scratch actually have. I have shown this Wiener Neustadt project already in Piran, and now it's a very short version to fulfill our obligation to show some work. A lot of our new work cannot be shown. There are quite a few competitions that we have done. There are quite a few projects that we are still doing, so they're kind of invisible in a way. And this is a project for Kazamaten, a kind of an ammunition storage from the invasions of the Turks to Vienna, which is in fact the corner. You see the dot there, it's a corner of the fortress. You can see the outline of the fortress because the entire center of the city is in fact the former fortress. The actual corner, which is part of the city park of Wiener Neustadt, it's a small city around 30 or 40 minutes before Vienna when we go from Ljubljana. And in this, and this is the condition that the building has when we come to do the competition first. So it's a series of underground spaces, which we think are actually a building, but when you go there, they're completely covered by greenery. So they're, over years, they have become a part of this park, and they have become a kind of one with the greenery that surrounds them. So our proposal and our project is about this kind of cleaning this landfill, demolishing the red and the pink. That you see here is the pink is what we took out, the complete hill, and the red is what we demolished from the interior of these old spaces. We even demolished some of the not really important pieces. I'm sure that here they would have been protected in the kind of 19th century additions to the spaces. So we add two pieces, one in the front and one in the back. One in the front that basically brings you from the city, the one in the back, which is a kind of a, they call it Neue Galerie, but it's a kind of a Kunsthalle or multi-purpose space that the city can use. This is almost like an underground plan, and this is our final plan. Two concrete structures, one in front, one in the back, holding together the brick spaces of the Kazamaten. As seen in section, the city sloping down 2 meters to enter into this underground maze, and then ending up 3 meters underground in the exhibition spaces in the back. You enter the building through this new door, a kind of a slit in between the incline of the ramp and the beam on top, into this kind of a space which kind of sucks you in and brings you to that door in the back. This is our office visiting the space just as it opened, with this oculus on top marking the way into the Kazamaten. Kazamaten is in fact has this enormous underground street where all the carriages were coming with the ammunition. It's called Strada Coperta. And this street is a kind of this Piranesian space which we basically just cleaned and equipped as a street space in a way. It connects all the exhibition spaces together with this floating corridor that you see here in concrete. Everything is very cheap. This project was done in over a period of 2 years from the start of design to actually opening of the building. So in these plates of the concrete are all the installations, as you can see, because none of the installations are in the upper spaces. And then you end up in the back space, a kind of a Kunsthalle, which is quite large in dimensions and top lit, and basically it's well, more than half sunken into the ground, which can be used for all different purposes. This is a concert or whatever, but also has an access towards the outside and towards the city park with this kind of a sloping field that we have added to it on the side. So a kind of a industrial looking building sitting somewhere on its own in the park, actually set against the medieval ruins, and in a way, in a kind of a very cartoonish way, with these stoplights, kind of continuing the idea of a renovated space. This brings me to the last thing that I'm going to show now. The NUC 2 project, the project that, it's again about the process that has been sitting at least on our tables for the last 6 years, and in fact we have won the competition 8 years ago, so it's already a second grade primary school. We have been developing it more or less continuously for the last 6 years. And as you know, it is, and I think it's important to show it because, of course, we are giving a lecture here at the University of Ljubljana. And this building, even though financed by the Ministry of Education and nominally belonging to the National and University Library, is in fact, should belong to the university, or will belong to the university should it ever be built. So in a sense, I think it's a kind of a important university facility, not nominally owned or operated by the university, which could essentially become the platform for the university. It could become the center of the university, because Rector's Palace, that today is our headquarters, where our bosses sit, is in fact, I don't know if any of the students really recognizes this space as a kind of a center of the university. No? Of course, everybody knows Nook. I don't really need to tell at least the architects, but also everybody else, the importance there. This is a project about dealing with history and the historical. There are multiple histories that inform the project that we did. One is, of course, the history of that building as a kind of a symbol of a nation built just before the Second World War, but also the kind of incredible architecture. The other history is the history of Rome, which sits under our building, the kind of archaeological excavations that also, in a way, obstruct, if you want, space for the library. Then there is more histories than that. There's also a relationship to this typological notion of Plečnik's library, the kind of development, the spatial development that you all know from the entrance into this kind of reading room, the domesticity of the reading room, this kind of domesticated spaces, kind of the idea of the home for the books. All of those histories coming together. This history of University of Ljubljana. University of Ljubljana is a kind of a confetti university. It doesn't have a campus. It basically is an injection into the tissue of the city. The city lives from the university. If there wouldn't be a university in the city, dispersed over the city of Ljubljana, Ljubljana would be half dead. You go to Klagenfurt and have a look. So basically, the relation in between the city and the university is one that goes hand in hand. So that there's also adding a piece to that history. And then the archaeology is a kind of a generative point, or generative tool to define possibly the interventions on top. We never wanted to demolish anything. You see Cardo and the Cumanus, and then you see the Plečnik's floor plan on top. So basically, we never wanted to remove any piece of archaeology. We wanted to work with the archaeology on the site. So it kind of generates the new building. So that the new building is, in a sense, one of these kind of Roman street crossing will also become the main circulation, the entrance hall, and then the main reading room of the new building. The building will form two squares and perform as some sort of an independent box rather than closing the city block. Over time, it has gone from the competition level, where there were a lot of storage spaces and offices, into a building which is going to be a complete singular surface of reading rooms, starting in the basement and ending up on the top floor. There's only going to be one floor of offices, where the programs are in the basement or in the entrance level going to be inserted in between Roman ruins. So we actually searched for Roman ruins and inserted pieces of program into that, where you're going to rise into the main reading room from this Roman area. You see the kind of illustration of the ruins. This is actually competition or post-competition a very long time ago. And this is just a clip from a movie which I couldn't show because it's far too long of a movie that we have made for the kind of changes that we have made to the project. So you see that maybe the staircases have changed, but essentially the whole idea still stays. The series of spaces on top, which are open access books and reading rooms of the new museum, of the new library. The changes in this central reading space, which in fact has exactly the same size as Plečnik's, except that it has 3 times or 4 times more surface, because by multiplying levels within it, we have actually created much more surface. The whole building is going to be constructed solely out of concrete. Again, Plečnik had all the references that we used already in the initial phases, where concrete is going to perform as structure and facade and window frame, and where basically we imagine, we hope that we would be able to do a building which is going to look like a ruin the moment it was finished. So in a sense, just a shell where that life could possibly take over. If built and when built, we'll attempt nothing more and nothing less than to become a major potential social space for the university. something that we will all hopefully recognize as center of the university and also a city institution. In a sense, with this kind of 24/7 opening times, that as planned, of course, it will be in a way, a kind of a small substitute for the center of the city. At the same time, it will also be a pair with with its older brother or sister or whatever you want. In relation to this notion of time, included in construction of building, preservation of building, the length of our projects, I will use art again. For why time? Because first of all, my time is up now. Secondly, on another matter, the time it takes for the architectural projects to get realized, because even in the best of conditions, because of the nature of our profession, which has essentially not changed since the antiquity, we still build with mud, more or less, but we have transformed this mud into more elaborate, let's say, chemical concoctions. But in fact, it's the same mud that we put together and spend years constructing. But it also is the processes, other processes, the political processes, like in the cases of NUK or the cases of drama. It's the financial processes, it's the social changes, it's the whatever that kind of makes the processes much longer. Our current project, either Inavguracijsko, which I'm not showing because everybody can see it for themselves, either took years to construct, because Inavguracijsko was also, this Islamic religious and cultural center was also a project that we won quite some years ago. With the possibility of these projects becoming reality, sometimes really looking very distant, if not impossible, these projects that I was just mentioning. So that brings this idea of a topic of time. Kniefer, who was a Croatian artist, who, as you know, or whatever, you probably know, more or less throughout his entire career was basically over and over drawing and painting exactly the same subject, the subject of meander, creating this immense body of work along the way. I have, as a young student of architecture, seen, this is why it's important. As a young student of architecture, I have seen an exhibition that he did, which was called Towards Meander. It was in Dom Juna, of all places, where he basically showed, much like Mondrian, who basically transformed the natural landscape into what we today recognize as Mondrian's neoplasticist painting. Kniefer showed the complete route of his own self-portraits, which basically started with the kind of realistic portraits and ended up with something that soon afterwards was going to become a meander, full-blown meander like this. I'm showing this with the notion of time because here Kniefer writes the title of this work is 24th to 28th of March 1978. So the duration in which it took him to rub graphite, because he was doing these drawings by rubbing graphite into paper, became the title of the work. So this notion of time is embedded also in the idea of production of architecture. The notion of process is embedded in the idea of production of architecture, but especially this notion of passage of time in all different aspects of the work. And I think it's kind of important, of course, again, abuse of art, but and important for our work as architects. Allowing myself the final loop, back to the title. Along this way, certainly require, my lecture should certainly require a much bigger amount of consistency, but consistency is something that Italo Calvino never managed to write about. The consistency is also something that I think would have been probably the final chapter and the most interesting part maybe for us as architects, because hopefully it would have included the lightness that I find especially dear to me, and also the quickness, which in Calvino's case is not about speed, but is also a kind of a derivative of the idea of lightness, the quickness of thinking and the lightness of execution, but consistency of search. Thank you. I removed this image so that Petra doesn't have any ideas about asking questions. So I don't know if there are any questions or we are relieved.
No, I have to ask a question, Vasa. pedagogical work that you're developing to get, I mean, it's not your own work. I think it's interesting to see that I think that in your case you are really practicing thinking architecture filmmaking. And at this point, I am really curious, what would you say at this point of your thinking filmmaking? What is that you're thinking and making? So how would you define architecture? Would you, I don't know, go on the side of architecture, the art of building, or how would you define it?
No, I think somehow I thought it was kind of obvious because the diversity. I think I'm big on diversity. The diversity of approaches. That every project in itself will require a different kind of attitude. That and we as architects have to have this lightness of dancing with or dancing, or if you want, moving in between the kind of and the ability to change the attitude suited for each project that we undertake. So there is no discipline in the kind of puritanical sense of the word. I think there is a discipline that is constructed and applied to each project individually in the process of each project individually. In order to construct a piece, a work, a building, if you want. Architecture, I kind of, yes, well, we basically build buildings. Our profession is called an architect, and we construct buildings. So, I mean, because I think that there is a kind of, there is the amount of stavbarstvo, there is the amount of constructing buildings, and then there is a certain percentage of that could probably have higher claims, so to say, no?
Maybe just some question. You said that critical thinking you are encouraging in the teaching process. How do you see the critical power of architecture? Like, how would you maybe elaborate on that? Although I think you did already. I'm really curious.
Well, I think that good projects or good buildings will essentially have to be critical in the sense that they will essentially have to have a layer of subversion to them. When I show the Nook project, when I talk about the project, I actually don't talk about the program at all, because the program for us was something that had to be, of course, dealt with when we were doing the competition, but in a sense is a completely secondary to the potential subversiveness of the entire project in the end. So I talk about all the intentions. So I think maybe that answers the question.
Vasa, mogoče so realizirani projekti nekoliko bolj stvarni, ampak tvoja predstavitev študentskega dela izpostavlja, pravzaprav, kot si sam rekel, eno politično gesto ali pa politično orodje za politizacijo oziroma depolitizacijo. In en pristop, kateremu nas nagovarja, še pravzaprav preoblikovanje zelo običajnega. Se pravi, študenti so v vseh delavnicah se lotevali popolnoma vsakdanjih tematik, vendar jih premaknili iz cone udobja. Zakaj je to politično sporočilo?
No, kot prvo, zašto verjamemo to, da kot prvo, everything is a project. To je moj true belief, tako da v bistvu ne obstaja polje delovanja. There is no field of activity which is not potentially a project. So that's one thing. This is why I also showed the bizarre and whatever this Life After IKEA project, which was not very much, in fact, to show about, but I think the intent was right. So I think what we tried to do, or let's say, or what we tried by of course including also the politics, I think that basically we try to show the not only to, well, you offer a certain amount of knowledge and you require a certain amount of knowledge back, but you have to offer maybe to a student, or maybe to, well, not really train them, but put them in a position where they have to train themselves to kind of react to much more complex and much more difficult tasks than designing a floor plan of an individual house. That they have to start understanding that through designing maybe this floor plan of a single house, you can actually do much more, that it can also be a political gesture, that the way in which you organize, for example, this, I'm talking now in the language of the 1930s, the relation between the kitchen and the dining room is going to talk about the way a woman participates in the life of the family, no? I mean, I can push it to, I could try and push it, I don't know if I could succeed to push it in something more, let's say, less picture friendly. So in that sense, understanding that everything we do can also be construed as political, I think is also very important. I think it's also very important to understand that projects like Ljubljana Limited, in fact, have, could have this kind of political undertone, because they somehow propose a construction of a different society in the end.
Different in behavior or different in thinking?
Different in understanding what the city is, different in understanding what the priorities of the buildings should be, different in understanding of acknowledging what are the target groups for architects today. I truly believe that active older population, not because I'm becoming older, but not only because I'm becoming older, is going to be a kind of a force to be reckoned with in the future. And if we manage to, also architecture, but also politics, if we manage to operationalize that, how do you operationalize that? What kind of, and I think also the proposal in that project, which I mentioned, I don't know if it was understood, we proposed that basically Slovenia can only develop science and education, because this is what we know how to do, and this is cheap. We have to focus on cheap things in order to, and of course those buildings were, I didn't show, there was a building that was proposing a new headquarters, or not headquarters, but some sort of a performance space for Jožef Stefan Institute on Tržaška Street. There was a building, so basically all these gestures, pulling the science into the city, very near Suna's house in fact, pulling the science into the center of attention, pulling the education into the center of attention. So these are political gestures. These projects were essentially strategic, but also as a consequence political.
First, thank you for a nice intriguing lecture, especially the first part. And I have a question related to that. So you speak about the institution of school being obviously the skill-giving institution, but then you speak about the most important thing, which is teaching the unteachable, and you explain quite directly what you mean by that.
Mm-hmm.
And then you speak about the two models of or forms of teaching within the school, which is a studio semester and the workshop.
Out of which you did one also.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was the first one.
Yeah, first.
So I'm interested in relation to these two models. So if you can speak a little bit more about how each one of those models of teaching contributes to teaching the unteachable, and in which way, and where are the differences?
Let me try to give you an example, because Polona was in the same school like I was there. We didn't have this kind of year-long projects, at least at the time when I was there. We had a series of short and mid-sized projects. So the idea was to develop the attitude, if you want to see a critical attitude, project and a critical attitude towards a project in very short spans of time. So very short bursts of energy. It's difficult to kind of keep this energy for the entire semester or 2 semesters when we do studio projects, and to kind of find the energy to kind of to push the students to maybe produce or push things forward. So in that sense, I think the workshop is much more superficial in some aspect, but also much more effective, because it's short, quick, and very, very active. It seems to bring better results on a short-term basis. Keeping the stamina for the long projects is a little bit of a problem. But what was the end of your question?
So how do each of these models participate to
development of this idea.
Oh. When you speak about teaching,
well, teaching the teachable is basically teaching that every project is, besides being about the amount of knowledge that you have about construction or whatever, or material or artistic talent, is also about every project offering this possibility or platform for possible either critical thinking or kind of subversive activity. And I think this is something that you don't really teach. You can prod people, you can push people, you can ask questions, but you don't say, oh yes, I'm going to give a lecture now how to be subversive for the future. So it's something that basically is a process that comes in between in this kind of model of conversation that we have in a studio. Hopefully it doesn't happen in probably 90% of the time. That's the, let's say, the not the bad part, but let's say the kind of sometimes disappointing part of our teaching process. That you think something should happen, but it doesn't, and it keeps on not happening. So it can be frustrating. We were just being frustrated before the lecture with Jure and Anja. Okay, so thank you very much. Thank you for your time.